hello. Oops, get rid of the music. Well, hello. Welcome to this episode of Mirror Darkly, Unbridled Inquiry. We are talking about fables today, as you can see on our lovely banner.
Yes.
We are back after being off for Thanksgiving.
Yep.
And so here we are. So I'm going to finish inviting people while you start talking.
Okay.
I'll listen. Half my brain will listen to you, and the other half will do this.
Oh, okay. That'll work.
I don't know if I need half my brain for this, but you know.
Yes. Okay. So, first thing to talk about is what is a fable. A fable is a literary genre. It's a fictional story. It can be in either prose or poetry. And it features animals, legendary creatures, plants, inanimate objects, or forces of nature that are anthropomorphized, and that illustrate or lead to a particular moral lesson or a moral, which may at the end be added explicitly as a concise maxim or saying. That being said, fables will also occasionally just have people in them. And the bottom line is that trying to distinguish between, say, a fable versus a parable is very difficult to do because they're essentially the same thing. The primary difference between a fable and a parable might be that parables will always have people in them, primarily. Fables generally will not have people, but occasionally they will.
Well, couldn't you also say too that that parables have a spiritual lesson more so than just a moral lesson?
No, not necessarily.
No? Okay.
But they function in the same way. That is, a parable will have an explicit point that it's trying to make, one point, just like the fable has one point that it's trying to make, whatever the maxim is that would be at the end. You don't always get in a fable a thing at the end saying this is what it means, or this is the significance of it, or whatever.
You don't always get that with the parable either.
And you don't always get that with the parable either. And of course, the most well-known parables are the ones of Jesus in the New Testament. Now, what I'd like to do to show you the similarity between fables and parables is to read one of Esop's fables. And you'll notice with this fable that it's all people. At least there is an animal in it, but it's primarily all
Did you mention that the animals talk in a fable? Did you mention that?
I didn't.
Okay, well, that's the thing. See, teaching third grade, I've taught fables. It's not in our current reading series that we're doing, which is unfortunate, but I've saved some books from our previous reading series. We have a really good one on fables. But anyway, so animals talk in fables with animals in them.
Yeah. I apologize for my voice. It's a little bit off, I think.
Yes, it's very off, and you're coughing a lot.
Yeah. But it's better than it was earlier this week.
Yeah.
So
he doesn't have COVID, so
no.
That's not the problem.
I actually
with his
got
voice.
tested for COVID on Friday because I had a medical procedure done on Monday, which is why my throat's the way it is.
Yeah. No, they went so far back doing the COVID test, it affected his throat. Just kidding.
No.
Oh, I do want
was
to.
intubated.
Yes.
So
just to let you know that every 10 minutes we'll run the show in 10-minute segments. And at the end of 10 minutes, if anybody has a comment or a question or a show topic idea, just put that in the comments and I'll read it on the air. So anyway, okay, go ahead and read your fable.
Or would you like to read it?
I can read it.
Yes.
I love to read aloud, and I
There it
especially
is.
like reading children's stories.
You will be familiar with this one, probably.
Oh,
If
okay.
not, then...
Oh, yes. I know this one.
Okay.
Okay, a man and his son were once going with their donkey to market. As they were walking along by its side, a countryman passed them and said, "You fools, what is a donkey for but to ride upon?" So the man put the boy on the donkey, and they went on their way. But soon they passed a group of men, one of whom said, "See that lazy youngster, he lets his father walk while he rides." So the man ordered his boy to get off and got on himself, but they hadn't gone far when they passed two women, one of whom said to the other, "Shame on that lazy lout to let his poor little son trudge along." Well, the man didn't know what to do, but at last he took his boy up before him on the donkey. By this time they had come to the town, and the passers-by began to jeer and point at them. The man stopped and asked what they were scoffing at. The men said, "Aren't you ashamed of yourself for overloading that poor donkey of yours and your hulking son?" The man and boy got off and tried to think what to do. They thought and they thought till at last they cut down a pole, tied the donkey's feet to it, and raised the pole and the donkey to their shoulders. They went along amid the laughter of all who met them till they came to a market bridge, when the donkey, getting one of his feet loose, kicked out and caused the boy to drop his end of the pole. In the struggle, the donkey fell over the bridge, and his 4 feet being tied together, he was drowned. "That will teach you," said the old man who had followed them. "Please all, and you please none."
Yes, which is, of course, the point of that one.
Right.
Although that would have been obvious even without having that
Yes.
stated, I think. Although, when you think in terms of like the parables of Jesus, or you could call them fables, either way, the term would work. Jesus never bothered to put the maxim, the moral, to the parable. And the disciples, and I would assume other people besides the disciples, had a difficult time picking up on what the point of it all was.
Sometimes he would explain it.
Sometimes he would explain them to his disciples, and so we get an explanation for them, sometimes not. But human beings are not as clued in as we would like to imagine that we often are. We have difficulty making sense of things. So, parables of Jesus, you find them in the Gospels. They form about a third of Jesus' recorded teachings, actually. They are usually relatively simple and memorable stories, often with imagery, and they convey messages. All the parables seem relatively simple, but the messages they convey are usually deep and central to the teachings of Christ. Some are longer and some are shorter than others. Generally speaking, parables are not to be confused with allegories.
Okay.
That
So
is,
explain the difference.
an allegory is where you take the different elements in the story and you compare them to something else in life. So, for instance, an example of an allegorical story would be Pilgrim's Progress, where each of the people that Pilgrim is named Christian, so it's pretty heavy-handed and obvious what the allegories are. And so you have Worldly Wise Man and Vanity Fair and all these things, and they stand for different obstacles that a Christian might experience in his or her life.
Do you have? I don't doubt a lot of people have read Pilgrim's Progress. Is there
Which
another?
is a sad thing.
I know, but it was rough getting through when we were reading it together early on in our relationship.
Yes.
When I was still auditioning for the part.
Yeah, you put up
Of
with it
Mrs.
just because you
Neverhurst.
wanted to keep me happy. You wouldn't do that now.
No, I'd be like, "Psh, are you kidding me?
This is stupid. Go away.
Unless I can get it on Audible, I'm not reading it. But no, something a little bit more
Let's see. What would be
current.
Just nothing is in my head. Can you think of a good one?
Let me see in your ear. Yep, nothing's in your head.
Thank you.
You're
I love
welcome.
you too.
Yeah, I can see the vacuum cleaner on the other side. Oh gosh, I'm like totally drawing a blank too. Just Google it really fast.
Okay, you keep talking.
Okay, I'll keep talking. So, I think what's important to note about the parables too is that Jesus brought the simplicity of the parables to confound the wise, but to reach the simple. And I think that's important because we like to view ourselves as very wise and knowing a lot of things. But
Animal Farm.
okay, there's one that's a little more contemporary. Yeah, that's a good one. Animal Farm.
Because the different characters in Animal Farm stand for actual people. That is, you have one of them stands in for Stalin, another stands in for Trotsky, and it's a story that parallels Russian history in the 20th century. When I took 20th century Russian history, one of the books that we had to read was Animal Farm.
Which was when I read it.
Yes, and
I took the same class.
after you've studied 20th century Russian history, when you read Animal Farm, it's incredibly obvious what's going on.
Is Alice in Wonderland an allegory? No. Okay. Because wasn't it supposed to be something like a...
Well, Gulliver's Travel would be another example.
Okay.
I mean, it's satire, but it's also allegory. That is, things you're standing in for. I suppose, actually, there are aspects of Alice in Wonderland that I think do.
Because wasn't it kind
like
of a
the Cheshire
commentary
Cat,
on
like the Cheshire Cat.
On the monarchy and stuff of the time? So,
and probably some skits in Saturday Night Live will end up being that way. Although generally speaking, they don't do allegory. They just take the
satire.
They just do straight satire.
Yeah.
Which, with straight satire, you don't hide who the figures are. Allegory, if you're in a oppressive political situation, then allegory can be useful because then you can do things. Well, give you a good example, just came to my mind. For those of you that are Star Trek fans, for those of you that aren't, this won't help. No matter what I do, it's not going to help everybody. We're trying. But in the original series that ran from 1966 through 67.
No, it was not just 2 years.
3 years, 68.
Okay, that was longer than that.
No, the original series was only 3 years.
Oh, okay.
And the third season wasn't as good as the previous two because they didn't have the money.
Oh, okay.
Which is the problem with Star Trek V, but now I'm getting off on other things.
Look, rabbit. It's chasing down the trail.
Anyway, just a minute. You have one of the original episodes where you have, they go to a planet and the people they find there, half their face is white, half their face is black.
Oh, I remember that one.
And they're in battle with each other. And come to find out, the reason they're fighting each other is because you have one group where the white is on the left side and one group where the white is on the right side. And so because of that difference, they are fighting. And of course, it was an allegory of the civil rights movement and the things that were going on in the 1960s in the United States. Science fiction often gets used to do allegory. Robert Heinlein's book, The Puppet Masters, and the movie, The Pod People, both are, to some extent, allegories of the Cold War and the fear of communism and it infiltrating society and being hidden and that sort of thing. So those would be allegories. Parables are usually not allegorical. Sometimes they are. You do have some examples of Jesus' parables where the different elements stand for certain things. So, for instance, the parable of the sower, or the seeds. That is, seed that's thrown in one area stands for this kind of people, seed here is a different kind of people, and so on. Most parables don't do that. And so one shouldn't, in reading through a parable, attempt to find that kind of allegorical connection between the different elements, because that's usually not what's going on unless it is very explicitly stated that it is an allegory. Otherwise, a parable has a single point that it's trying to make, just like a fable has a single point that it's trying to make. One of the mistakes that people make in interpreting either fables or parables is they try to put too much into them or read too much out of them. That is, they are very simple.
Well, in some respects, they're like an analogy that it only goes so far.
Right.
Like people will pick an analogy apart and be like, well, but there's not this, and what about that? And
Yeah.
it's like, well, analogies only go so far.
The other
Also, they're
thing-
not good for convincing people of things. There's simply
Well,
a
they
way.
can't prove something.
Right. They can't prove something, but they give people
They
a
give
picture.
a picture, an illustration.
Right.
And can help conceptualize things for people, make
Right.
sense of something. Because it's easier to move from what you know if it's close enough to something that you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the purpose of analogies. And to some extent, the purpose of parable is to help you make sense of something. As human beings, we respond very well to stories. And so that's why the Bible has so many stories in it, because it's the story that we hang on to and remember, and it impacts us.
Very few people hang out in the parts of Numbers and Leviticus that are just about the law or about actual numbers.
Yeah.
There are stories sprinkled in there. And I know when I read through the Bible every year, and I come to like Leviticus and Numbers, even Chronicles, it's like, oh, gosh. But when a story will pop up, it's like, oh, okay. You know, it's like 5,000 of this and 5,000 of that and 5,000 of this and 5,000 of that. It's like, get to the story.
Yeah. But if you want people to listen to you, if want to actually affect people, your best bet is through storytelling. That is, you will reach more people that way than if you're simply, that is, more people will read a story than will read a book of theology.
Right.
Or will read a scientific textbook, or will read a dry history book. Now, history, if it's done properly, is story. But history
Well, it
oftentimes
says
isn't.
story in it.
Yes, but
You would think.
oftentimes history is not taught very well, which is sad. Which is why you get, for instance, in the Harry Potter novels, the most boring class of all is history of magic.
Well, I think some of that problem with history is because, you know, there's a lot of dates and things to remember, but you had to have it, like you had to know the order of things. But now I think it's better because if you need the date for something, you can just Google it.
Right.
So now you can spend more time focusing on the story of it than what happened in what dates.
Yeah. Yeah, and teaching history, and just like with anything, you want to focus on the story aspects of it. And as people are interested in the story, they will pick up those sorts of little details automatically because they want to know the relationship between, you know, what's the beginning, middle, and end, and what else is going on at the same time. But to just memorize dates is a stupid way of teaching history.
Right.
And too often that's what it devolves to. And so Jesus, when he taught the people, did not give them dry, boring theology. He taught them stories that illustrated the theology.
And I think that's why sharing your story of your salvation experience and what God's done for you is much more effective than sitting down and pounding on someone,
Yeah.
pounding on their head with a Bible, like, well, this verse says this and this verse says this.
Well, you don't convince
share-
anybody that way.
Right.
For one
You
thing.
share your story, your personal experience, and then you can back it up just like in any kind of an argument where you're trying to convince somebody of something. You use analogies and things like that to draw a picture for them, but then you kind of bring it all home with facts and, you know,
Yeah, well,
things
the
like
data
that.
is secondary.
Right.
That is, you convince people through the story, and then they will be interested in wanting to know the more nitty-gritty data-related
Right.
sorts of things. But it's like when you buy a car, or with advertising in general, it's not all the statistics about the performance of the vehicle that sell the vehicle.
Right.
It's the sizzle of
Yeah.
the steak that sells
Well,
it.
it's interesting because I'm like a huge fan of reality TV, and I was watching Welcome to Plathville, and it's like watching a train wreck in slow motion, or it is watching a train wreck in slow
Yes,
motion.
it is.
But anyway, the second oldest child is the oldest son, and he's married, and they want to move away from where they live in Cairo, Georgia, to, which I thought was Cairo because it's spelled the same as Cairo, Egypt, but it's Cairo, Georgia. So anyway, they want to move away from there because his parents moved closer, and they're the ones that are the really controlling, ultra conservative Christians, and they want to move away, farther away from them because it's really been hard on their marriage. Anyway, so that's a little background. Anyway, she's been looking at houses for about a year and just kind of watching the market and seeing where things are. But now that the parents have moved into Cairo and much closer to them, now they've kind of stepped up their game, and so they're looking really seriously at houses. So they're looking at this house online, and the price looked good, and all the statistics about it look good. But she said, let's go visit it and see if we like it. And that's the thing that real estate agents want. They want you to visualize living there. That's why they don't take you into an empty house. If the house has people living in it, they have to take all their pictures down off the walls, but they still have like their furniture and maybe even their clothes. Well, they have to have their clothes there, but it's really clean. Everything's cleaned up and stuff. But if the house is empty, they will stage it. So they'll bring in furniture and like throw rugs and stuff and set up like a little living room and a bedroom so you can imagine yourself living there. Same thing with model homes. I used to model home a lot years ago, and now it just makes me feel bad about how my house looks. So I don't like to do it anymore. Because we've been in our house like 30 years, it needs some serious upgrades. But anyway, so they put furniture into model homes so that you can see what it looks like to live there. But the books are all glued down, the phone isn't real, although who has landlines anymore? But back in the day, we had landlines, and so there would be a phone, but it wasn't real, and things like that. So because they want you to have a story in your head of, oh, I could see us living here. And even when we bought a house, we were like, okay, well, our daughter Vanessa wasn't fully adopted yet, and we were hoping to get another baby. We ended up with 2, but we were hoping to get another baby, and so we had to think about our house in terms of foster care. So that was one of the issues with our house. The other thing is housing our many volumes of books. He has more than I do. What are we up to now? About 5,000 books in our house alone. It doesn't count what's here at the church.
Right.
But,
or what's on my Kindle.
Right. So we have at the time, it was probably more like 3,000 volumes of books that we had to find room for. And so every house we went into, we're like, oh, this is really cute. We really like this house. We like these features about it. Where are the books going to go? And I mean, look around where you live. Think, could I fit 3,000 volumes of books in this place?
Yeah,
Probably
it's surprisingly hard to find a house that has a setup where you can convert one of the rooms into a nice library.
Yes, which we did do.
Actually, converted to 2 rooms.
Yes.
But anyway.
But anyway, so but real estate agents want you to visualize yourself in the house, and they like hearing things like, oh, I could cook in this kitchen. Oh, this is a really cute, I like this patio. Mm-hmm. We could sit out here and drink coffee in the morning. Real estate agents like that because you're starting to tell a story that you're starring in, that the setting is that house.
Yeah.
So if you walk into a house, it's like, no, I can't live here. It's like a little cracker box house and on a postage stamp size piece of property. And you're like, no, I can't live here. There's no story there. The real estate agent knows you're not going to buy it.
Yeah.
So same thing when you buy a car. Mm-hmm. Now, when I go to buy a car, I generally already know what I want, and I'm just there to get it.
Right.
If I'm there to look, I tell them, I'm here to look, I'm not buying. Now, the difference was our Saturn. I was just looking because we had 2 vans that we needed to get rid of in pretty short order. And it was right before Christmas. I was like, there's no way we can afford a car with Christmas coming and all that. And I told the salesman, I said, I am not buying a car. I just want to see what you guys have. Because I heard good things about Saturns. This was back in 2004 when Saturn was still a thing. Yeah. And he said, what if I could get you in a Saturn tonight and get you a really good deal? I go, it would have to be an excellent deal for me to walk out with one tonight. I didn't walk out. I drove out. So I drove out with one that night. And it was a really sweet deal, and it was a really good car.
Yeah. And
when we got rid of it, I was really sad because it was a really good car, but we needed to go electric because gas prices were killing us. But anyway, but a lot of people fall into that trap. The salesman will be like, oh, so what do you do for a living? I'm a teacher. Oh, I was going to be a teacher. I hear that all the time,
Yeah.
and they try to connect with you, get you to tell your story. Then they, when you're driving the car, you're saying things like, oh, I really like these seats. It fits my body really well. I'm really comfortable in it. And you start telling the story, and they know they've got a live one. So
yeah,
it's all about story.
and
We haven't had any comments yet, so I'm just resetting my timer.
Okay.
Just FYI.
The fact that it's all about story is important to understand. Jesus in Matthew chapter 13 explains why he tells parables. And people read what he says and they'll think that he's saying something about like he's trying to hide from people what he's saying, but that's
Right.
missing his point. Is what he says in Matthew chapter 13, verses 10 through 17 is, the disciples came to him and asked, why do you speak to the people in parables? He replied, the knowledge of the secrets of the kingdom of heaven has been given to you, but not to them. Whoever has will be given more, and he'll have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what he has will be taken from him. This is why I speak to them in parables. Though seeing they do not see, though hearing they do not hear or understand. The point is not to try to hide the truth from the people, but rather to get it to the people because they're not going to get it directly. That is, they're not going to listen to just dry theology.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to just listen to the explicit statements of what reality is. Telling it a story gets to them far more effectively than any other method.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what Jesus' point there is.
Well, and that's why when you're preaching on Sunday is you include, pop culture stuff like,
Right.
Star Wars references and things like that. And sometimes you'll tell a story about the girls. I know I was always starring in my dad's sermons, us three
but
kids.
It illustrates.
Yes,
It's a
one of the
parable.
hazards of being a PK.
Yeah, or I'll pick on you.
Yes, you will.
I've done that too. So, but yes, the reason that preachers will do that is because, again, the story is what draws people in. The story is what helps them understand what you're trying to explain otherwise.
Or you could be like Mr. Russell and just tell a story that has nothing to do with anything.
Well, he would open his sermons
Yes.
with a funny
Anecdote.
anecdote.
And you always knew, okay, this is what the sermon's not about.
Right, it had nothing at all to do with the
It
sermon.
was like a cold opening on a TV show.
Uh-huh.
Cheers did that. They had a lot of cold openings that weren't even always filmed on this in the same time as like after.
It had nothing to do with the rest of the...
Yeah, Nick Colasanto, when he died, they had some cold openings where he was just in the cold opening and nothing else before they wrote him out of the storyline. And so it seems like he lived longer than he did. But if you watch it, like right now I watch Cheers. I'm watching Cheers. And so you'll see him in the cold opening, and then you won't see him the whole rest of the episode, and nobody mentions, oh, Coach went home early or anything like that, because in the main part of the episode, Coach isn't in it at all because the actor's already passed away.
Right.
But they had these cold openings that they could still use. So, but they couldn't use them after they wrote him out of the
No, that
story.
would
Be like, whoa, serious. What do they call it? Continuity issues?
Yes. So, yeah, story.
And there was a story to illustrate what we were talking about.
Yes. So, Aesop's Fables, I wish that more people would read them. If you get a book of Aesop's Fables, it's relatively short because there's only 100 or so of them. Esop, according to tradition, lived in ancient Greece sometime between 620 and 564 BC. So this would be a good period of time before Jesus lived. And it places him actually back around the time of the Babylonian captivity, when Israel was taken into captivity by the Babylonians. He is thought to have been blind, and normally is thought to have also been a slave. You get different stories about him because we don't really know that much about him. And all the fables that are called Aesop's fables are not necessarily his. That is,
sort of like the Psalms aren't all David, but people like just say that they're David. Like not in the Bible, but people will be like, "Oh, the Psalms of David," and it's not. Yeah,
not. With Aesop's fables, they've just all been they're fables. They've been collected, and then they're ascribed. It's like Mother Goose. Or to take another Harry Potter reference, Beetle the Bard. Again, stories that are just assigned to this individual, whether they have anything to do with him or not. And so there are scholars that will try to figure out where they come from. They are Aesop's fables, of course, all being Greek originally. And actually, that's one of the issues with some of the Aesop's fables that are attributed to Aesop, is that they don't have a Greek original. Some of them come through Arabic. The Arabs had a lot, Muslim scholars had a lot to do with preserving a lot of ancient Greek literature.
Interesting.
Well, the Muslims conquered Byzantium, or Constantinople.
Constantinople and Timbuktu.
Yes, the eastern.
It's Dr. Seuss' book.
Yeah, the eastern half of what had been the Roman Empire. And so they came into possession of an enormous body of literature, and thankfully they saved it and copied it into Arabic, and then it went back into Europe through Moorish Spain. Islam during that period of time was not radicalized as it later came to be. It was a much more open system back then. There is more diversity within it. They were more tolerant.
Seems like you're really struggling with your voice.
Yeah, it's what it is.
Yeah. Probably should have postponed one more week to let your voice recover.
Yeah, who knows?
Oh, well, too late now.
Too late now. We're in the middle of it. I'll let you talk more than you
if I have something to say.
Have.
By the way, just so you guys know, we don't prep for this beforehand. I just say things that come into my head. He's the one that
does the prep.
Yeah, does the prep and presents the topic, and then I just think of questions, like questions that you guys might have.
But that's what makes it more interesting, I think. Otherwise, it would...
Yeah, we don't talk about it beforehand. Sometimes I don't even know what the topic is, and I'll publish the wrong thing.
Yeah. See, this is why why it's nice if people, pop in with questions or comments, because then we have something to jump off of.
Right.
Also, if we could have more invited guests that would agree to...
Well, right now with COVID, we can't have anybody in the booth with
anyway,
us.
So.
We did have a few guests. Now, they do have the ability to bring co-hosts on through the Facebook Live. One? Okay.
If we upgrade the program again, we could do, I think it's up to 8.
Okay. Well, we don't need 8 co-hosts, but if somebody wants to participate in the discussion and be on the show, we'll figure it out. It. Yeah, that'd be cool.
We've not done it, but we could do it according to the technology, according to the software that we have. We should be able to bring somebody in. Probably
not with the computer we've got. We've got to.
Yeah.
We're planning on upgrading the computer in the not too distant future.
Right.
Actually, now might be a good time. Isn't this like a really good time to buy computers?
Probably.
Yeah.
We need to talk to Eric.
Yes, you do.
Get that in the works.
He's been a little distracted. This guy.
Yeah, a little bit.
So, but
Yes, variety of health issues.
Yes.
So, where was I?
So Aesop really has the most famous fables.
Yes, his fables are the most famous. Fables, though, exist in other cultures besides Western cultures.
Well, you have the Anansi Tales, which are from Africa.
Right.
We read a lot of Anansi stories in this current reading series that we have. And Anansi is a spider who I always think is a girl, but it's actually a boy spider. And we just read one where Anansi offers Turtle some berries, and Turtle's very hungry, and so he's going to eat the berries, but Anansi says, your hands are filthy, go wash your hands. So Turtle goes off and washes his hands, and Anansi eats some of the berries. And so then Turtle comes back, and he's like, hey, there's not as many berries. And Anansi was like, well, I was very hungry, it took you a long time to go wash your hands. So he goes to eat some more, and she's like, your hands are still very dirty, go back and wash your hands. And so he goes back to wash his hands again, even though he knows full well that his hands aren't dirty. And by the time he comes back, the berries are all gone. Well, he decides to play a trick on Anansi and to get Anansi back. And so he contrives this thing with fish that he's inviting Anansi to his house for dinner. And of course, Turtle lives under the water. And so Turtle says to Anansi, you want to come to my house for dinner? And so Anansi says, okay. And so Anansi can't get to Turtle's house because, Turtle's in his house, and Anansi can't get to his house because he's a spider, and spiders float, they don't sink. And so Fish says to Anansi, why don't you put rocks in your pockets, and then you'll be able, or no, not in your pockets, in your hands. Hold on to rocks, and then you can get down to spiders, or to Turtle's house. So that's all well and good until Anansi sees the food that's there and wants to eat it, and so Anansi drops rocks and whoop, back up to the top. So those are the Anansi stories. That's one of the Anansi stories. But
yeah, there are stories from India, Africa. Actually, there's African American fables in the southern context of slavery, Uncle Remus stories, Brer Rabbit and Brer Fox and Brer Bear, are modern examples of African American storytelling. There are, of course, questions as to whether the person who wrote the Uncle Remus stories, Joel Chandler Harris, whether he was a racist and apologist for slavery. But still, you do have those stories that come out of African American.
Did he just collect the stories, or did he make them up?
I'm not entirely clear on that.
Okay, because that would make the difference.
Yeah.
If the stories were made up by him to make black people or slaves, or make slavery look like a good thing, or make black people look like they're bad thing, that would be different. But if he just, kind of like Grimm's fairy tales, they collected the oral tradition of the fairy tales and wrote them down. So if that's what he did, then, although his intention may not have been a good thing, if he wrote down the stories the way they were told, it doesn't really, his politics, I don't think, really matters.
Yeah.
So even if he...
Although it could influence how he presented them told them.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting question.
But I think it's important to realize...
Most cultures have fables in them.
Right. Well, and the reason for it is in oral tradition, like you have Indian fables and stuff too.
Yeah, Native American.
The thing about it is that those were the stories they used to instruct their children.
Right.
Like, Little Red Riding Hood, Don't Talk to Strangers, things like that.
Right.
That
European fairy tales.
Right.
Are exactly that sort of thing. They're essentially fables.
Right. And so it's designed to instruct children in how to behave. And so story is really important with children, but the oral tradition, because things weren't being written down, many eons ago.
Because people weren't literate, because books are always handwritten and therefore too expensive for average people to afford, and so oral tradition was critical.
Right.
Through most of human history, up until the advent of printing, which eliminated a lot of oral traditions in the modern world. But instructing children, that's a good illustration of the value of story. It is simply telling children, don't do this or do that, not overly effective. But give them a very colorful story to illustrate that, and that'll stick far more effectively.
Yes.
As you're less likely to, as having heard Aesop's fable about the man, the boy, and the donkey, the concept of not trying to please everybody is going to stick in your mind a lot more clearly than it otherwise would. And it'll be more meaningful to you.
Right. Well, we get, when we go to the Indian Museum every January, except for COVID Januaries, we go to the Indian Museum for a field trip, and they tell a fable out there. It's Eagle and Blue Jay. And Eagle has the kind of superpower of great vision, and Blue Jay has the great superpower of being able to fly really well. And so this owl and this blue jay fall in love, and they get married. And so it's time to go out and collect acorns for making the meal that they need for their food. So Owl and his mother send Blue Jay out to get the acorns, because that's her job, I guess, as the wife of the owl. And so she goes out and she collects the acorns, and she starts making the meal for it's like a porridge. And so she tastes it. She's cooking it, and she tastes it, and she's like, this is really good. And she keeps tasting it and tasting it and tasting it till there's very little left. And so then she takes it back to Owl and his mother, and she's like, here's the acorn porridge that I made. And they're like, wow, there's not much in here. Tomorrow when you go out, you need to collect double the amount of acorns. So Blue Jay went out, and she collected double the amount of acorns, and she's stirring and cooking the acorn porridge, and she's like, this tastes really good. And she keeps doing it, obviously, until she eats too much. And then so the story ends up that Eagle's mother sends Eagle to go watch Blue Jay to see what she's doing, why she's collecting so few acorns, or has so little porridge. And he discovers that she's eating the porridge, and so they send her away and all this. And the kids pick up on it right away about being greedy and being selfish and things like that. So, but that's an example of a Native American fable. So
that's good. So any comments?
Nope, nothing yet.
Nothing.
Yep, people just listening,
Okay.
enjoying our amazing selves, I guess.
I guess so.
Have nothing else to do.
Yes.
Sorry.
That's okay. When you think in terms of the different parables of Jesus or the fables of Jesus, and the interesting thing, maybe I should talk about this, pure fables do show up in the Bible. In the Old Testament, you have one of Gideon's sons. The rest of his sons have all been slaughtered. And so this one son who has survived then tells a story about when the plants of the field went out to find a king for themselves. And he talks about how they went and approached the grapevine. The grapevine said, why should I leave, what I do, making gods and men happy with my wine, to, become a king. And they went to different plants, and they finally found essentially a weed, and the weed agreed to do it. And the point of the story was that the people of Israel had found this disreputable individual to act as king, Abimelech, over Israel. And Abimelech had been the one that had slaughtered Gideon's children, except for the one that escaped. And so he's saying, you know, bad things are going to happen to you because you've made this choice. So that's a good example of an actual fable that appears in the Old Testament. In the New Testament, though, Jesus' stories, we classify them as parables, but they're really no different than Esop's fable of the man, the boy, and the donkey. The only place that we see parables in the New Testament, though, are in the Gospels. That is, the book of Acts doesn't give us any new ones. We don't see any in Paul's letters or Peter's letters or James or the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation, though, well, it's its own thing. The book of Revelation is what we classify as apocalyptic literature, and we have no other corresponding literature that's similar to it except for the old hymns that come out of the African American experience of slavery. And what the book of Revelation is a book written by oppressed people and in a totalitarian situation who are expressing a desire to see those who are oppressing them overthrown and them gaining their freedom. And so if you look at the old spirituals, Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, Come Forward to Carry Me Home, it has nothing to do with spiritual things, really. That is, it's a story about how to escape slavery and get north. The chariot is the Underground Railroad. And so you couch what you're saying in terms that the oppressor is not going to clue into. And so the book of Revelation does that. And so the whore of Babylon in the book of Revelation stands in for the city of Rome, because it says she sits on 7 hills, which is obviously talking about the city of Rome. And she rules over the nations of the earth. Again, Rome.
Rome does have a lot of stairs.
Yes.
A lot. I think Rome is Italian for stairs.
Yeah, well, it's on hills.
We were at the Forum, and, you know, they dug down to, you know, the original part of it. Like, there's buildings up at the top where the door is like 20 feet above your head. But anyway, so we were walking around the Forum after we'd gone to the Colosseum and everything, and then our tour guide, he said, okay, so to get up to the current city of Rome, you just take the stairs. And I was like, oh, more stairs. We climbed those stairs. And then there's that building. It's kind of their equivalent of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, but it's a huge building, and you have to be quiet. You're not allowed to talk on it, and they'll shush you if you talk on there. But it's all stairs. The whole city is stairs. And, of course, you have the Spanish Steps, and you have stairs everywhere. The whole place is full of stairs.
Well, they never invented elevators.
No, or escalators. Yeah, just make the stairs move. I mean, it was murderous. And it was hot and sweaty. It's very humid there. So we're like dripping sweat. We're climbing stairs constantly.
Yes. But anyway, my point was that the book of Revelation comes closest of any other part of the New Testament to being parable-like or fable-like.
Or really allegory.
Yeah, or allegory.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. If you watch the movie Harriet, which I just watched, I'm not sure if it was Amazon, if it was on Prime, or if it was Netflix. But anyway, they do delve into that a little bit. Like they sing, and the plantation owner couldn't tell who was leaving and who wasn't, and like when someone was escaping, they would sing. And so you couldn't hear them leaving because you had all these people singing. And they didn't do this in in the movie, but the all the the slaves singing their spiritual songs, like, oh look, they found religion, we did something good for them, they all found Jesus. It's like, well, that's not really, I mean, I'm not saying they didn't, they did,
but they also found how to
get away.
They took what Paul said seriously.
Yeah.
If you can gain your freedom, do it.
Yeah.
He's talking about, staying in whatever condition you're born in.
Right.
If you're a slave, if you can gain your freedom, do that.
Yeah.
But anyway, primarily the parables or fables are located in the Gospels and make up about a third of Jesus' teaching. They fall into, for the most part, a handful of themes. So, for instance, the parable of the leaven, parable of the mustard seed, share the theme of the kingdom of heaven growing from small beginnings. Parable of the hidden treasure, parable of the pearl, form a pair illustrating the great value of the kingdom of heaven and the need for action in attaining it. The parables of the lost sheep, lost coin, and lost son, that is the story of the prodigal son, form a trio in Luke dealing with loss and redemption. Parable of the faithful servant, parable of the 10 virgins, involve waiting for the bridegroom and have an eschatological theme. It is getting ready for the day of reckoning, the day of redemption when Jesus comes. The parable of the tares, the parable of the rich fool, parable of the budding fig tree, parable of the barren fig tree, those also have eschatological themes. But then you've got other parables that kind of stand alone. The parable of the unforgiving servant, which obviously deals with forgiveness. Parable of the Good Samaritan, dealing with love your neighbor as yourself. And who is your neighbor? It's essentially everybody. Or it is everybody. And then the parable of the friend at night, dealing with the persistence of prayer. That is, keep at it. Don't just give up.
Right.
So, again, that pretty much covers all his parables, because there's Jesus' focus in his ministry and his teaching was to describe the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God. Now, the difference in the terminology, kingdom of heaven versus kingdom of God, comes about in who the audience of that gospel was directed toward. As in some gospels will say kingdom of heaven, some will say kingdom of God. In Judaism, by the first century, there was an increasing reluctance to use the word God, because just like they were uncomfortable with using God's name, even using God, the word God itself, was a little bit uncomfortable for them, because they were fearful of violating the commandment of not taking God's name in vain. And so if you just never said God's name, never said the word God, then you couldn't possibly violate that commandment.
A lot of modern day Jewish people, when they're writing something like on Facebook or in a text message, instead of saying God, they'll do capital G space and then lowercase d, so they haven't written God's name, right, so that they...
Because if the thing gets defaced, or if you're writing on a chalkboard, it gets erased. In fact, this was an issue with the development of computer systems. Rabbis actually had to come up with how does this work and how are we going to handle this? And the determination was made that it was okay for a Bible program or whatever to display the biblical text with God's name in it, even though you'd shut off the computer maybe, because you're not actually destroying that, because it's actually sitting on the hard drive. It's just being displayed there, so it doesn't matter.
Wow.
But that was something they actually had to think about. And so they came up with circumlocutions as far as how they would say things. And so kingdom of God...
Workarounds. Circumlocution is a workaround.
Is that a word that most people don't know?
Yes.
Oh.
That's why I smiled. I was like, okay, how am I going to define this word?
See, this is one of the problems that I have.
Yes.
Is I will use a word that I'm
Well, when
completely
you
familiar
mention
with.
Pilgrim's Progress, I'm like,
Probably
can
not.
you think of something a little bit more even Animal Farm is a little bit of a stretch for most people, but
It's a problem with being a nerd
yes,
or a geek.
bookworm.
Bookworm.
Anyway,
What was my point?
circumlocution,
Oh, so anyway,
workaround.
Workarounds. Because they didn't want to say the word God, they would say heaven. You see this reflected when Jesus talked about the religious leaders trying to get out of keeping their oaths. And so if you said by the altar or by your head or whatever, rather than using...
If you swore by the altar, by your head.
Yeah, rather than by God, then it wasn't as strong of an oath.
Right. Kind of like crossing your fingers behind your back
Right.
when you make a promise to a friend.
Yeah. So, kingdom of God, kingdom of heaven, exactly the same thing. It's just that you'd say heaven to represent God without actually saying the word God. And so the gospel writers, depending on whether their audience is primarily Jewish or primarily not Jewish, or maybe Hellenistic versus more Palestinian Jewish, they would adjust the wording accordingly. We
have about 2 more minutes.
Oh.
Which I think your voice has about 3 more minutes.
My throat does not hurt at least.
Oh, it's painful to listen to. I mean, not painful like irritating. It's just we want you to be able to finish the word in your sentence, and it's like his voice is giving out.
It's very annoying.
And then you'll cough and restart your voice's engine again.
Yeah. So anyway,
and you have
it'll be
to preach
interesting
tomorrow,
how preaching goes tomorrow. But each day my voice has been better. So it's better today than it was yesterday. It's worlds better than it was on Monday after my procedure. So we shall see.
Yeah.
Of course, I have another procedure coming up on the 14th, so who knows?
Yeah. So that show will be up in the air depending on how his voice is. So.
Yeah, well, that will happen on a Monday again.
Right.
So
Well, and this happened on a Monday and this is Saturday.
this is how it is on Saturday,
yeah.
so we'll see how it is.
So if he comes out of the surgery with this thing acting up, and see, this is really his area of weakness is his throat because of his asthma and stuff, and you had to have your tonsils removed like you were 4.
Mm-hmm.
So that whole throat and lungs thing is a real area of weakness for his body. So I think that's what happened.
This was only the second time in my life I've had full anesthesia too.
Yeah.
So the first time was when I was 4, and so it's been a
he's
while.
like never sick, never. I mean, I get sick periodically, but as far as like major health issues, I have my gallbladder removed like, I don't know, 10. Let's see, no, it was before my dad died. So it's probably about 12 years ago, and then 11 or 12 years ago probably. And that's the only surgery I've had besides my wisdom teeth being taken out. But so I'm never really majorly sick either. So hospital stays are, well, let's put it this way. Last time I was in the hospital, that hospital doesn't exist anymore. So they tore it down and they added a hospital in Palmdale. So, but it's now
well, it's 5 o'clock
assisted
now.
living. Okay,
Go
so
ahead and give the
next
ad
week, Steve said I can do the show. Oh,
Ah.
trust me. Yeah, you don't want to listen to an hour of just me talking, but thank you for your confidence. So next week the topic is...
I've got to come up with one.
Oh, we don't have one. So if you have a show idea...
This would be a good time.
This would be a good time. Actually, I thought about that. The thing that I've been listening to in the Bible study about kinship.
Friendship.
No, kinship. Shoot, what's it called? It's the relationships in the Bible. Kinship. What are the 3?
I'll have to look that up.
The middleman one, the mediator one, and that's the 3rd one. There's a middle one. Anyway, I'll come up with the words, but maybe we can do that and just kind because it explains a lot of things that it really opens up your eyes to, like, oh, this is what they're talking about. It's the culture of the ancient world that we're unfamiliar with.
Right. There are a lot of things in the ancient world.
Yeah.
As we're so familiar with the Bible that we just assume that we know what's going on, but a good percentage of what you think is going on is because you're reading modern sensibilities back into a foreign culture.
Patron's the middle one. So kinship, patronage, and the one that means mediator.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it's really interesting.
Yeah.
So
A key interpretive thing to understand biblical reading the Bible is to realize that you're going into a foreign country when you read the Bible.
yeah.
It's not here. People are not acting like us.
Yeah. So
If you just have that in your mind, that'll help you a lot.
okay, so we'll come up with something for next week.
Yep, we will.
So anyway, so if you are looking for a place to worship, we do stream our church services live every Sunday at 11 a.m.
Yeah, you can watch to see whether or
Pacific
not my
time.
voice works tomorrow.
There you go. There's always that.
Take bets.
Yeah. And we'll be here next Saturday, Lord willing, and the creek don't rise.
Yes.
With some topic.
Yes, with some
Maybe about
topic.
creeks rising.
Yes. So.
Okay, have a
thank
good week,
you.
guys.
Bye.
Patronage. It's kinship, patronage, and what's the other thing? But the guy has a book.